He's done it all. Hundreds of skydives, traveled the world, army, police work, intelligence work, and prison. Now he's an author and a biker with an axe to grind. He's Dennis M. Young. Today is the 18th of January 2017. I'm Dennis Young for A Henchman's Honor. Before we get into the meat of it, if you don't want to listen to this, you can just skip forward to the shotgun blast there, and I'm going to do some housekeeping on my last video. So the sound, we're going to work on the sound. We're going to turn down, there's a few comments about the shotgun blast is too loud. I like a loud shotgun blast, but I understand if you're watching with headphones on, it can be a bit of a shocker. So we're going to turn that down. Maybe give me a comment on how the volume is for you. Music. Someone offered me music. A guy started off with Time. I went to your website, and the thing is, I need like hard driving rock and roll. I don't really listen to rap or soft stuff, or 60s, 70s is kind of my thing. So you have any comment on that? Let her fly. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, on the last one, on the 370 Russians, I mentioned that you can get good info from a bad source. So some people are saying the source is bad, but it is a logical thing for Trump to do, and it was a rational thing for Trump to do. And if the source has been bad in the past, it doesn't make it incapable, and I mentioned this in the last video, it doesn't make it incapable of being a good source on one point. So that's the issue there. Other people are saying, well, this, and I addressed this too. I don't know why people address things or counter-address things that I've already addressed, but an ally, as in Trump and Putin, does not make Trump a servant. It makes him an ally. These things are synergistic. They've been done tons of times throughout history. I don't even understand the conception of that. We fought with the Russians in World War II as allies. It didn't mean we were Stalin's servants. We had one goal, and to defeat an enemy, and Putin, and now England with Brexit, and several other European countries, and Trump are synergistically coming together to knock out the world order. That makes no one the servant of the other. Also, just as a kind of a side note, I did have some other information from a very good source on these 370 Russians, but if you mention sources, they kind of go away, so I'm not going to do that. So, okay. The Khazars versus the Semites, the inside-out, backward, and upside-down war. If you thought the last video was contentious and, could be argued, this one is a big one. This is a question that always causes name-calling and stupidity and thoughtlessness. So I thought, well, I haven't been called names in a long time, so not serious names, so I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. Before we get into the Khazars and Semites, I want to quickly deal with the 17 intelligence agencies saying Russia hacked the U.S. elections. It's absolute garbage. Number one, WikiLeaks says it was a leak, not a hack. So an insider passed the information out, not a hacker from the outside digging in. So it wasn't even the same direction as a hacker. Number two, WikiLeaks has never compromised its integrity ever. It's been 100% reliable in the past. No other news agency on the planet can say the same thing. And if you're counting along here, this is number three. Having 17 intelligence agencies on the same file is redundant and inefficient. 16 of those agencies could be fired and the nation would have the same net gain of info. So I want to hear Trump say it. CIA, you're fired. It should be noted that Kennedy had the same plan. So the Khazars versus the Semites, who's who. We're going to probably challenge the way what you thought growing up, the same as I was challenged and hit in the face with it. So I'll just get into the story here. I've spent a total of 6 weeks in Israel, 3 weeks in 86 and 3 weeks in 96. I grew up in Canada with a friend whose dad fought in 4 wars in Israel in 48, 56, 67, and 73. They moved to South Africa, then had just moved to Canada in the late 70s when I met them and became friends with the whole family. In the early 80s, I joined the Canadian Army, and my friend joined the Israeli 202nd Airborne Brigade before moving on to a special forces unit they call the Sayarat Golani. So the Golani has their special forces, and Sayarat is it. He was with that unit when I flew over from serving with NATO forces in Germany to visit him. I was on leave in 1986 to investigate the possibility of joining the Israeli army myself. This is where I first heard that European Jews are converts, not genetically linked to the Jews in the Bible. I was shocked and even kind of a bit sad that this great moral ability they have to claim the land wasn't accurate. So I kind of buried the matter in the back of my mind. I left Israel and just kind of went with the it can't be true sort of angle. In 1996, I was with the military police doing a tour of Bosnia, which half of a henchman's honor is about. And again, I visited my friend in Israel. They gave me 3 weeks leave, and I headed down to see my friend. This time, he was working with some kind of secret operation, either Mossad or Shin Bet, or anyway, he had to travel a lot, but he kind of, I don't know, he talked to his boss, and the fact that I was coming down, and they kind of put him on a on-call sort of thing within the country, because he was in the country anyway at that time. He didn't stop any travel overseas. So I stayed in his house. It was a gated, guarded community just east of Jerusalem, so he was on that on-call thing. But he had to go in for meetings quite often while I was there, and sometimes he dragged me along. Sometimes I had to hang out at the local coffee shop, and sometimes I actually went in the buildings with him. I noticed how in highly secured Israeli institutions we could just waltz in and everywhere without anyone batting an eye. He would kind of flash whatever he was flashing there, whether it was a badge or I didn't even see it. But without notice, we went and had coffee with the deputy peace of Jerusalem in her office. A few days later, we went and had a huge dinner with her family and friends. This is where I again heard the Khazar versus the Jew argument. There were 24 highly placed Israelis at the party. Some of them argued that science and history pointed to the fact that modern European Jews are the descendants of converts. There was a stringent opposition from some of the people present, as you can imagine. They argued about half the time in English just to benefit me, but reverted back to Hebrew when things intensified. But I caught the gist of the argument. Genetic science has come a long way since then. It was very strange to me to think that Jews aren't genetically linked to the Jews of the Bible. I had a predisposed position to not believe what didn't fit my worldview, as most of us have. The question boiled down to who is a Jew and who has the right to ask who is a Jew, and is Judaism a religion or a race? And we're going to explore that right now. First, the players. And if you want to talk about pristine sources or not pristine sources from my last piece on the Russians, these are pristine sources. You can all look them up. Professor Shlomo Sand is a Jewish Israeli historian who has taught at Berkeley and in Paris at a school whose name I'm not even going to try and say. He now teaches at the Tel Aviv University, and he's author of, among many other books, The Invention of the Jewish People. Dr. Harry Ostraer, a professor of genetics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, sounds pretty serious, whose study showed that Jews have genetic markers different from non-Jews around them, and that the genetic markers were Levantine in origin, meaning the gene goes back to the ancient land of Israel. Dr. Aaron El-Haik, an Israeli-American molecular geneticist who collaborated and confirmed the work of Dr. Sand, along with, there was a lot of people on that project under the work with Sand. Basically, they called bullshit on Dr. Austraire. Dr. El-Haik's study concluded that Ashkenazi Jews, the modern European Jews, descend from the Iranian population, which later mixed with East and West Slavs, and possibly the Turks and Greeks around the 8th century AD. You can't really argue with genetics. I mean, we're talking DNA. Many other historians and researchers have weighed in on this. Some call BS on the Khazar connection, but they agree, mostly, that at some point a European people converted to Judaism, whether it was the Khazars or later, but there was some sort of conversion at some time, and that they are not, these Ashkenazis are not Semites, which takes us back to the same question of who is a Jew, is it a race or religion, and who gets to decide? It's really, it's a questions for Jews themselves. An interesting point is that if these people did migrate from ancient Israel, why didn't they carry on speaking Hebrew or Aramaic? Why did they not preserve their culture as Jews do today? Why did they invent Yiddish, which has a lot of similarities to German? Why has every Israeli prime minister changed their name from their original birth name to a Hebrew name? Why was that even necessary? A lot of changing and inventing going on here. It leads to a question that very few of us has even known existed, never mind search for an answer. It may have us ask, if they aren't genetically Israelis, what are they doing in Israel? Well, if we aren't genetically American or Canadian, what are we doing in North America, from a native perspective? We're sort of the pot calling the Israeli kettle black in this case. In Canada, we rounded up the locals like in Palestine. We gave them a piece of land like in Palestine, and instead of bombing the land, we paid them. Still, if you're a treaty Indian in Canada who lives on a reserve, you get paid. It's cheaper than bombings and less dangerous, and the government has to waste money on something anyway. Is the question really, how can we all live well and get along? No, it isn't, and we're going to look into that. So this is where things, get even weirder than that question. When the Romans dispersed the Jews in the 1st century AD, it wasn't likely that they traveled 2,000 kilometers or 1,400 miles in those days. You had to pull a donkey, listen to the wife complaining that you should have bought a faster donkey, and how was the decision made to travel to the Caspian Sea area in the first place, and what was the draw? It's entirely likely that the dispersed Jews moved as short a distance as possible and intermingled with another genetically Semitic culture that we now know as the Palestinians. I don't think anyone questions that the Palestinians are a Semitic people. This is so inside out and backwards. This would mean that a genetically non-Jewish people moved into Palestine and pushed out the Palestinian Semites. And if you stand up for the Semites, you're an anti-Semite. The Bosnian War taught me that in the weird upside-down world we live in, there are no questions that shouldn't be asked. This is not, this sacredness of not questioning certain things has got to go if we're going to ever find real truth on planet Earth. So how do an ill-equipped, non-questioning, unobjective, government-educated minds possibly solve a hugely complex issue like the Arab-Israeli tension? None of the above information changes anything in this horrible Gaza situation. Before the massive influx of Jews from Europe, the Arabs and Jews lived side by side peacefully in Palestine, despite their different cultures. So what happened there? How do we get back to that? Could it be as simple as paying the Palestinians just like we pay our natives? Could it be a two-state solution? I don't know. What I do know is that the U.S. has a global strategy of tension. This is fairly highly publicized from the Council on Foreign Relations, It's out there all over the web if you want to look it up. The strategy is basically one that believes that chaos creation followed by U.S. force results in peace under the boot of America. So first the chaos, then the forced solution, and there everything settles with the U.S. being there on top of the local pyramid. It requires a premeditated state of war, or at least a rumor or threat of war. The Palestinian slum was created with malice to achieve international banker dominance in the area. Most of these evil international bankers are Khazars, and America is the tool of these sinister people. So the American military is the gun that sits in the hip pocket of the banker. Paul Wolfowitz, a former head of the World Bank, planned the attack on 7 countries in 5 years. Former General Wesley Clark spoke about it on Democracy Now!
I knew why, because I'd been through the Pentagon. Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
We have bankers planning our wars. Professor Sand said, "The people who are going to die today and tomorrow are more important than those who died in the Holocaust, because the future is more important than the past." That is sort of our view when we think about North America and the native population. We don't like going back to the fact that we came here and gave them diseases and killed them, etc. So forget the past, cash the check. There's no strategy of tension there. We pacified them with checks. Whether Professor Sand and El Haik are right or Professor Ostraire is right, it doesn't really matter today. The slaughter in Gaza and our bad relations with Russia, China will continue until the bankers abandon their strategy of tension and their lust for global dominance. It's not likely that they will stop intentionally being conquering pricks and really think about non-aggression principles. The simple theme that resonates in the biker world would apply here. Respect. You have it or you have violence. My Israeli friend's dad, who fought in 4 wars for the country, sort of had a garbage in, garbage out philosophy. He said if you treat children like men, they'll act as men. If you treat men like children, they'll act like children. And if you treat people like animals, they'll be animals. The strategy of tension demands that we treat people like animals and that we disrespect them by lying to them, undermining them, and murdering them. Evil, the strategy of tension, does not care about death and destruction, nor does it respect anything. It wants to control and to win. The Bible weighed in on evil and the Khazars many moons ago. So this is what the Bible said in Revelation 2:9, the King James Version. I know the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Doesn't sound like a big fan of these guys. We know what evil is. We know who are calling themselves Jews and are not. I don't care who calls themselves what or who lives where, but whomever it is and wherever it is, they have to have decency in their hearts, which is the antithesis of premeditated murder and the financial control that we have now. Before we embrace peace, we have to abandon evil. So that concludes that short little blurb on those facts. In the future, I'm going to do something in depth on Bosnia, how we took Bosnia down using financial instruments first, then lies and of course bonds, and how we pitted people against each other. It's going to take me a while, and also I might do something more in depth on the Khazars, depending on your comments on this piece. If there seems to be a want for more in-depth exploration of the Khazars, I'll do that. If not, or no one likes to hear this, then, well, I won't. So in the meantime, I'm going to be dropping excerpts of my book onto YouTube. And so I'm going to do it. I think I got 7 chapters, but I'm not reading the whole chapter. I'm just reading excerpts from the chapter. Just kind of the stuff, the enticing stuff. So I'm Dennis Young for Henchman's Honor. Just a reminder, dump Twitter and go to Gab. Thanks.